when we talk about like how fives value individualism inherently, it sounds like we're puffing them up and denigrating six. But like, as you know, I think David, you've mentioned a lot. One of the big struggles of like nine and six and all these not a four, not a five things is, the almost like awareness that I need to individuate as an attachment type, and then I almost prioritize talking about that or gesturing towards it, but not quite like it. Like whereas four and five, it's sort of just inherent.
Yep.
The big hormone enneagram.
Let me lay it on the line. I got a little freakiness inside. Let you know that the man has got to deal with it.
Hi, I'm John Lukovich, sexual self-pres, 4 with a 5 wing, 458 trifix.
Hi, I'm David Gray, self-pres sexual 9 with a 1, 974 trifix.
What up? It's Emeka. I'm an 8-wing-7, sexual self-pres with 854 fixes.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I am a self-pres social 3, wing 4, with a 369 trifix. If you like our podcast, guys, make sure you go like and subscribe on the Apple Podcast app. And if you really like us, you should definitely leave us a review.
Welcome to Big Hormone Enneagram. We are back doing some shit. Last time we took love line calls, and the final voicemail was a cliffhanger to do not a 5. For people who've been listening to us at all, we have throughout the podcast made reference to mistypings, and especially how in the Enneagram world, 4 tends to be idealized, and a lot of people mistake themselves for 4 thanks to bad teachings, bad descriptions, and almost as common, but not quite as forward and out front, are people mistyping as 5s. And so we're tackling that today. But before we do, Emeka, can you share once again the Love Line voicemail number so that people can continue to submit questions, comments, and requests? Because these have been fun.
Yeah, 323-696-0647. Also, I think we want to do not a 4 specific episode at some point. So if you want to send in a question specific to like mistyping as 4, you can send that into that same number as well.
Cool. Oh, last thing, I want to just plug, like, I'm still doing coaching and Enneagram consultations. So hit me up on my website if you're interested. What I do with a lot of people is they know their type, or they have questions about their type, or don't know their type, whatever, but they need somebody to have a discussion, clarify things with. They want to go deeper. I've had people who just want to explore the esoteric background of the Enneagram, independent of type, and understand the fourth way and all that kind of shit. So hit me up. You can contact me through my website.
All right.
Hi, my question for you guys is, could you guys do a not a 5 riff? This is kind of based on the not a 4 theme that you have. And I guess comes from sort of how you said that 9s can tend to mistype as 5 and 4s, which maybe seems to me this commonality of not wanting to engage with the world or a certain kind of withdrawn stance. So I've learned a lot from your not a 4, and could you do that for 5 in a not a 5 theme? Thank you.
Mistyping is type 5. Why do people mistype as 5?
Well, I mean, the first and most obvious thing is that erroneously people use cartoons and caricatures to understand the typology. And so like 4 gets labeled the emotional sensitive type. 5 is just stereotyped as the smart type.
That likes to read books.
Likes to read books, likes to be
Likes to
alone.
research.
Antisocial.
Research.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you like to learn things, understand things, that universal human interest? You must be a 5. Yeah, being a deep thinker, being a thoughtful person, liking to be alone, feeling exhausted by other people. Like, yeah, the 5s have these qualities, but they're pretty universal as well, so they don't really actually describe anything.
It's kind of an offshoot of not a 4 because I felt like the not a 4 stuff is an octave to get people to look beyond like their initial first impression of what that type means. And I've done several coaching calls with people around mistyping it as type 5, and it's always based on like I don't like people, and I'm an intellectual, and like these are all very distinct type personality structures. And I think once people start to realize what that is, it's like it starts to clear things up.
Well, one of the main obstacles in my view is that there aren't a lot of prominent type fives that we all kind of recognize collectively as five. Like, five is a fairly rare type. And so that means that, like, culturally speaking, that archetype is not well represented. And
Mm.
so when you think about what a smart person is, or an intelligent person, or an intellectual person, a lot of the big names that we think of, like Einstein or something, are controversy, or nines rather than fives.
Hmm.
And so a lot, and like a lot of the archetypes we have for brilliancy actually refer in a lot of times to nines and sixes rather than the fives take on intellect. And David, you've done a lot of parsing out certain popular figures like David Lynch and Einstein, and arguing for them to be nines rather than fives. Do you have anything you want to put in there?
Well, I mean, a distinguishing feature with the two of those people is their kind of universalistic, style. It's very synthesizing and unifying and pulling things together, and into a grand sort of symphonic vision of the universe. I mean, David Lynch, maybe not as obviously so, but if you watch his there's dozens of YouTube um, videos where he's talking about his meditation foundation, wherein he gets into the subject of consciousness and meditation, and even creative ideas and where they come from. When you see how he approaches it, it's very optimistic. It's very
Philosopher of the universe.
philosopher of the universe, exactly, which is our pet nine name. And and it's all just kind of synchronistically, beautifully all coming together in this magical, wonderful picture, which is just extraordinarily not five, which is a much more dissecting energy, and it's much more sort of at the at the level of what's happening sort of mentally or intellectually. It's five is a much more cold kind of style.
Yeah, it's a pretty big difference. I mean, even just energetically, being around someone who is a 5 versus like a type like 9 and 6, and those are the two types that mostly mistype as 5. Usually people who are 9s and 6s.
Yep.
6s because they're intellectual, and you know, a lot of 6s don't feel like they like people. And so if you're an intellectual person, and you don't like people, then I'm a 5. Or 9s, who a lot of 9s are very intellectual, and they also feel like they withdraw from other people. And so it makes sense that a lot of 9s who don't necessarily see themselves as the sensitive, mopey, depressive 9, but they feel like they're the intellectual, studious 9 who doesn't like people that much. They're going to see themselves as 5. But I don't think people understand to the degree that the 5 type structure is, based around the assumption that everything is separate. I'm even separate from myself. And if you could just imagine yourself into that as a starting baseline, then you might understand like a worldview based on detachment and separation.
One of the things that I think is also interesting and important about not a five, like not a four, is making nine great again and making six great again, where
Hmm.
a lot of the gifts and talents of those types that are natural to those types, get lobbed onto five or four, right? And so
Yep.
when I first learned the Enneagram back in high school, and I was doing my own research and pursuing it, one of the ways I kind of learned six was like, well, if you don't know what type you are, it's kind of like the default type. And I knew that was wrong immediately, but I knew I had sixes in my life, but I had a hard time internalizing six energy. And I've talked about going to Japan and how it changed my view on six and stuff. But
Mhm.
yeah, those experiences, it was kind of sad how much the very obvious qualities of six, the wakefulness, the attentiveness, the sharpness mentally, the the attentiveness, the intentionality, all that all those qualities in the context awareness of six was almost like not granted to six, it was given to five. And likewise, as I said before, it's like the intellect, the reason we call nine philosopher of the universe is because nines have this philosophizing, intellectual, thoughtful side to them. That's a really pronounced major part. Everybody I'm amazed at how many times I see online people saying a nine-ish statement, and you're like, hey, that's kind of nine-ish. And they're being like, well, I'm not completely conflict avoidant, like as if that's what nine is. And there's plenty of conflict prone nines. So what is a nine in the absence if you can't define them as conflict avoidant? Like, what are they then? So anyway, this distinction gets at, as David was speaking to, like how nines think and how nines perceive things, and owning that as a gift for nine rather than just giving all the positive qualities to five.
Another thing too, with five as a style is, in whatever they do get into, it excludes. It kind of,
Yep.
they keep going deeper in such a way that, and they're getting so obscure and so down a super uh, niche, rabbit hole, that they're sort of just incidentally excluding everybody in a certain way, right? It's very detached and self-involved in a certain way, as opposed to six and nine, which kind of has an inclusive style, as both of them in each in their own way, as far as how they're framing things up.
Yeah.
Like one,
Go ahead.
I was going to just reference something you've said often about fives, that it's not about just studying and researching things. It's about discovery, which you
Mhm.
have to get to the edge of what's known about something to discover something that no one knows. And that is exclusive.
Yes.
Like, not to say that that's better than the sixth way, which is inherently sort of trying to make sense of the grid, like, which is inherently inclusive in a way. It's more of a practical way that it's going to try to make sense of something in a way that includes different perspectives. Whereas what fives can end up doing is, because you're trying to get to that origin point of a true discovery of something unknown, is that you're trying to push to the edge of something to the point where you don't care if anyone comes with you.
Right, right. Yes, that's a really important distinction is between six and five. It's two words for me that I think resonate. I think that six is looking for what's true, right? They're
Mhm.
looking for what's real and true. And in so doing, there's a lot of referencing. There's a lot of sort of pushing off or like checking in on different points of view, different perspectives, and bouncing one's thinking off of those established perspectives to see if they're real, if they resonate, and if, X resonates with Y, resonates with Z. These kind of
Mhm.
and meeting where these all align and where they don't, and trying to find consistencies and inconsistencies. Whereas
Mhm.
five is more about the word I use is discovery. And I'm speaking to, I want to know everything about a subject because I want to know what's not yet known about it. And so, whereas six is like pushing off of ideas, five is like pushing away. It's like
Yes.
pushing out into the unknown, into what's empty. And there's the separation that Emeka was speaking to earlier. It's like, um once I, as a five, feel like I'm not in that empty space, or I'm not in that pushed away space, like something starts to creep up on me, or like I'm feeling like oh, maybe this way I'm thinking is more linked to other things than I thought it was. I immediately and reflexively try to push more into obscurity, more into the void, so to speak. And I'm a 4 of the 5, and so I think of 5 as the same energy of 4, that introspective, like seeing that 4 is all about, but from the lens of the mental center rather than the heart center. And so there's both a focus on originality, but for 4, it's I want an original identity. I want to be uniquely myself. Whereas 5 is like I want to see something unique. I want to see something unseen and undiscovered before.
One thing you're saying there too is that 6 in a way is going for, or naturally includes sort of a wider field of objective reality, let's say.
Yes.
Whereas 5 is hyper subjective because it gets so specific and so exclusive and so non-referential to the wider field.
Yes.
And
Like, go ahead.
You remember when we did the episode on Dark, and we talked about how that show was a 5 show, how you start from the beginning and it's this huge fucking labyrinth of all these different points, but as you watch the show, you're zooming in and in and in, and you finally get to the origin point. This is the point that births this entire complicated labyrinth of everything. And it felt to me like that was a good example of what the 5 is trying to do. It's like you get into a subject from the 5 point of view. It's like I'm trying to see through beyond what this layer is. Okay, let's go beyond that layer. And if that's relatable to something else, we need to go beyond that layer and keep going until we get to the origin concept that is completely separate from everything else.
Right.
And that's a completely different intellectual approach than what 6 is doing.
Right. Like 6 really values clarity, whereas 5 almost values obscurity. Because what they're doing, it's almost like I think of like both 5 and 6 sort of like as mental types. I mean, you could say this is 7 too, but I almost imagine them as like in the middle of a large body of water. And the 6 wants to keep different locations of land in sight, right? It's like, all
yeah.
right, there's the dock, there's my destination. There's the buoy that shows me whatever. Like, I don't know fucking shit about sailing, but all this kind of stuff. Whereas the 5, it's like if I can see land, I'm not in the right direction. Right? I need to
That's good.
keep going away. If I could see land, like then that's not original. That's not what I'm needing. So it's like I want to
Yep.
keep pushing further out.
That reminds me of like all of what you're talking about reminds me of the Mars rover. And it's like the Mars rover is the 5 and the satellites going around the Earth are 6s.
Ooh,
That's good.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Like the Mars rover just sings itself happy birthday all alone.
And the other thing is the thing about that 6 is doing, trying to like map out where
Mhm.
everything is and make sure that like to try to figure out what's real. In doing so, is to try to decipher what is good and what is bad.
Yeah, there's a super ego involved.
Exactly. And that is an element that's absent in 5. Not to say that this is good or bad, but it's just a different orientation. But that, in trying to figure out the map, is that there is good information and there's bad information. And there's not really this sort of a morality aspect with 5s, because it seems to me that 6 is trying to decipher the integrity of the information, not only in the information itself, but in the source, like the people behind the information. That's
as,
a big
as if it's a cause, right? Like,
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Do you
yeah.
think 6s view themselves as trying to find out what's right and wrong? Or do you think they just view themselves as just trying to find out what's true?
It's one of the things we got into, like the idea that most 6s will not admit to needing or wanting or caring about authority, but there's this way that they're constantly checking the grid. I need to check in with this person, or I need to check in with this source. And so these things become things that I have to keep track of or check in with. So at the same time, I don't think 6s would consciously admit to wanting to decipher what's right or wrong, but it just ends up being this underlying thing that plays that gets in the way of figuring out what's real.
Or rather than talking about it as admitting to, it's just incidentally what is that
Yes.
they are sort of wanting to take a side,
Hmm.
on intellectual matters.
Well, it's kind of like, as we heard with Courtney in the object relations episodes, that sixes are attachment types and they're attached to the protecting function. And so
Hmm.
that natural sensitivity to awareness and context and how things happen gets infused with the emotions that one had around their father, right? Or their fathering figure, not necessarily the literal father, but the one that provided
Mhm.
protecting and structuring. So there does become this good father, bad father judgment of, or at least like, is this a trustworthy and therefore good? It's not good like one-ish morality good, but there's like, does this, um, a reliability and
Hmm.
a sense
Will
of,
this orient me?
will this orient me or will this deceive me? And it becomes this sort of emotional question that gets infused in their mental center uh, way of creating discernment and distinction. So it's one of the struggles of six where they start mixing the emotional center and the mental center, and where the mental center like operating mental center operates independent, like some like in a kind of compartmentalized space
Hmm.
from the emotional center and the moving center, but it's like at the same time it's infusing their thinking in the background.
And part of how the emotionality comes in is when there is, say, a school of thought that sixes are, um, delving into or adhered to, is that they have mixed feelings about it, and
Hmm.
they'll give a very positive, description of, say, a certain source, and then they'll give a very negative, right? And you'll see them mixed about it, right?
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
One of the things that's important to understand is, I mentioned that six is an attachment type and five is a rejection type. They're double rejection. They had a rejection uh, dynamic with the protective function and the nurturing function. And again, if this doesn't make sense to you, go check out our object relations episodes with Courtney Smith. But, uh, you know, part of what that means as a double rejection type is it's almost like there is nothing in reality that is an archetype that I have any relationship to.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I'm really out in the nothing where it's like, similar to four, but four has a frustration thing with it. It's like everything let me fucking down and it's not it. Five is like this, like just there's a sense of complete separation, alienation and nothingness. And so being an attachment type, six is looking to what is real and true in an objective way. Whereas fives being less attached to objective reality can really live in a purely conceptual space, which means that in their thinking pattern and style and in their they can get lost in like the kind of fascinating aspects of things they can come up with in their mind that may or may not have any bearing in actual reality. And
So
they're not really that worried about it. Like they're not worried if this is like objectively true or not.
it's really, on one level, what you're saying there, it's the same as seven, right?
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
it's just the same way that in the heart center, two and four are really strong colorations of heart, and
Mhm.
whereas three has a quality of, or a capacity for channeling sort of a more neutral reality, let's
A
say,
new
in the heart
age.
space. And same it is, in the head center, where five and seven go into, completely wild subjective territory, while six is, again, as you're saying, going for objective reality.
Right.
Y-
They're worried about it. Like sixes are making
Yeah.
sure that there's something real.
Yeah, which means that you got to have your foot on solid ground or on the
Yeah.
grid, in relation to something. So you to have something to push off of, even if it's negatively, is more six. But the thing that strikes me, because we have a handful of fives in the group, and because it's a type that there's not a whole lot of, just hearing fives talk about their experiences is an education. And so one of the things that I had saved that one of our fives had written was that that there's a profound disconnect from anything sourcing beyond me. When people approach or talk to me, nothing reaches me. And even the attempts to reach me is like what they're touching isn't even real. So there's this like try to grasp what
Yeah.
she's saying, that that this me that you think that you're approaching doesn't even seem real to me. Like
Mhm.
like to try to grasp the complete detachment and separation from even the sense of your own body. And that wouldn't make sense. It's a rejection object relations perspective, that the right way to be is to not be here.
It's
I'm not
rejecting all of reality.
all of it. And so like the intellectual approach of five is it doesn't matter like what corner to the five, like what corner they push into in terms of how it relates to other people, because they're not even connected, or like the idea that you can reach me or touch me is foreign to the five perspective.
I'm also gonna add that this might be hard for people to picture, given even the way we're talking about five, but much less all the stereotypes around five. But there's a lot of fives that are not that like intellectual or even
Yeah.
smart.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just one topic.
Yeah.
Well, even like I mean, so like my dad is a five. He's not that like intellectual. Like he's very much a double rejection. There's like nothing in the world for him, and he's sort of very like alienated. It's always like he's still learning to be a human being, and he sort of knows how to kind of turn on being a human. He's very obsessive with his he's like he loves he's got a six wings that he loves vintage cars and taking apart vintage watches, and he's very mechanical, he's very practical, he's self-pres, but it's like he's not like reading tons of books. He's
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
coming up with brilliant theories. Like he's very isolated, he's a cartoonist, he does his thing. So it's not like he's like the know-it-all type or the intellectual theory type. There's a lot of fives that like in some from some point of view, like their thoughts are very or like the what they share or express from their mind is not like brilliant insight jewel. It doesn't have to be that to be five, and that can sometimes create confusion because you're like, well, then what makes a five? And that's why you have to rely on understanding these structural elements.
A lot of people think fives, what part of what you're saying there, a lot of people think all fives are geniuses.
Yes, right, exactly.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Right.
It's like one of those distinctions that when you really understand the type four structure and the five structure in the realm of like people idealize those types in terms of what that means for creative capacity, or how much of a genius someone might be. It's like to see how those type structures actually get in the way of those things, these qualities that people think
Right.
four and
That's good.
five have, because it's like the four, this sort of over specific quality of four and five actually gets in the way of free flowing creativity. It's not conducive. That's why so many artists are sixes and nines, because I mean, especially nine, just because being able to be creative is just being able to draw from so many things and synthesize, and nines are very natural. They can just flow with that. But
It's
fives
also
just give
being
you-
in the body too. Right?
yes.
Yeah, I mean that's a major factor with 4 and 5 is that just using the Enneagram symbol in a kind of literal sense, how perfectly opposite 4 and 5 are in relation to the body center that symbolizes the profound disconnection from the body. And in the case of 9, you're kind of doing I mean, this is part of the scramble of the centers of 9, but you're doing heart and intellect, the mental center through the body in a certain way, and so you're more prone to actualizing. Actualizing your creativity, actualizing
Yeah.
your mental conceptual capacity, and wanting to bring it into physical form in some way, or written form, or there's just more motive, and there's more motivation to connect, right, with 9
Mhm.
as compared to 4 and 5, and to get, to share, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of body, I was wondering if you two body boys, David and Emeka, could share your physical impressions of 5 versus like 6 and 9.
Oh man, I think that's a huge one because it's like these types become very real in terms of in my physical experience of them, because I get really frustrated sometimes when people want to like make an intellectual comparison of these types, and I'm like, have you felt what these types feel like? Like it
Right.
feels so different. Like trying to say, oh, I'm confused about 6 versus 8 or 9 versus 5, and I'm like, have you felt what an 8 feels like? Have you felt what a
The
5
answer
feels
is
like?
no. None of us feel what it feels like.
Oh my god, it's like
And
these are
by
complete.
and by felt, you mean in the body, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Not just like touch their face.
Yeah. Well, okay.
And not feelings, is what I
Not
mean.
feelings.
Right?
Like
Oh, okay. I
sense
got you.
sense in your body what it must feel like to be a 5. I guess that's basically asking someone to be a body type.
Yeah, I can barely feel my feet at any given moment, let alone someone else's energy.
Yeah. And so I guess my inherent way of experiencing other people and typing other people is sort of I'm feeling into their body what it must feel like to be them. And so sometimes I look at someone and I can feel like a 6's sense of angst. It hits me in my gut, and I probably 6 is the easiest type for me to recognize because I get this immediate feeling in my gut. And not to say that
Electricity pinging around or something.
yeah, it's a feeling in my gut teetering on an edge, and that's what 6 feels like. 5 feels to me like and there are a lot of 5s that are very um interactive, it seems like, but there is an invisible wall between you and the 5.
Mhm.
And it's not that 5s feel cold, even though some of them do, because there's some 5s that are animated, but it feels like there's an invisible wall that you can't get through.
Mhm.
And even
There's
as
no
they're being
channel, there's no door.
yes,
Like
That's it.
6 wants you to like come in through a door, even if they have trouble getting you there.
Mhm.
Like 5, there's just no access point.
Yep.
And this is being expressed. It's not just like a 5 might be sitting there and just having a normal conversation, and but this wall is being it's assumed that there's a wall, and so that shows up in certain behaviors that other types don't have. Like 5s will just not respond to other things that other human beings respond to, or that just normal shit that you would think most people would respond to. Like you say something and you would expect like the other person to acknowledge the thing that you said, and a 5 won't do that. It's almost like you didn't say anything at all. And like we have a typing service thing at Anygrammar, our group and our website, that people can send in typing videos, and we'll watch the video and tell them what their type is. And so it's a very stock exercise. There's 5 questions, and like what are your interests and blah blah blah. But it's interesting that there's a because everyone's doing the same thing, and so there's a way that the different types are approaching the same exercise. And so it's really revealing. But so funny to see the way 5s approach that exercise, because so often there's just so many detachment oriented things that this isn't normal. This isn't normal that this person isn't really acknowledging that there might be another human on the other side. Like, there are ways that people like, 6s and 9s might be hyper aware of the audience and hyper aware of what the
Mhm.
audience might be thinking or feeling about them. So there's like preemptive ways of like, I know that you might feel this way about what I just said, that they're kind of,
Interesting.
Yes.
they're saying things like, I just said something that doesn't sound good. Like a lot of 6s will say that's like preemptively managing people's reactions to what they're saying, to saying like, I just said this thing about having a gazillion cats, and I know how that sounds. But so there's this over awareness of like eyes watching me, even though it's like they're alone in a room recording a video. Whereas fives barely even acknowledge that there might be anyone watching. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like it's so interesting that they'll start the video. Like a lot of times people introduce themselves like, hey, I'm going to start answering these questions now. And we just recently got a 5 typing video where she didn't even say anything. She didn't even say what question she was answering. She just started answering questions. And when she was done, she just turned off the camera. She didn't it was so
Yeah, there
cold.
was no intro, no outro, nothing.
It's you only know it's the kind of thing when everyone's doing the same thing, so it really stands out like, oh, that person's different. Like, and it's consistently across the board that fives are, expressing like, I am not here with you. There's a wall between us. I'm barely connected to myself as a human entity. And I guess it feels cold. That's what it feels like in my body. It's like it feels very separate.
So for me, as a 9 body type, I think I've said it before. Well, like Amika was saying, I kind of do the types, so to speak. I know the types through my body impressions. And 5 is the most difficult type to know
Mhm.
because it's so not in the body.
Yep.
And it's somewhat like me talking about the social instinct. I have to sort of find it each time because it's so sort of difficult for me to integrate it into my body knowledge base and put it into words. But yeah, I mean 5, and then the other piece too, since I'm a 9 and doing that body style, which is very integrative and empathic at a just sort of a generic level, right? Not even meaning it in any altruistic way. I'm just taking in other people's energy, and there's just that. So the sense with 5s that I can't even, that there's no, like you said, John, there's no door. Like I can't even, there's no, it's like what, it's like, there's just the whole, Alex Gray intertwining, swirling universe, just stops at that wall. You know what I mean? There's
Right.
there's no intertwining there.
It looks and it feels like a face with no mouth and no eyes.
yeah.
Yes. There it is.
Said. That's
There it
great.
is.
But it's like still buzzing.
Right.
Still
That's
like
true.
there's like
Still
zzz,
electric. Yeah.
5s are high strung.
Ugh.
Yes.
You don't
Disturbing.
you don't feel
It is
relaxed and
disturbing.
spacious around them. Like there's like ooh, even though
Yep.
that's great.
Like
Yeah, there's
words
no
are coming
enjoying.
out. Go ahead.
There's no enjoying a spa day with a 5.
No. Like, I mean, it's like being around. The other thing about 5 that's really noticeable that I always feel like it feels impossible that anyone can fit that level of specificity in one sentence. Like, I always feel overwhelmed hearing a 5 talk because it seems like it feels like man, it feels like they're spitting out way too much granular and specific stuff, and combine that with the sense of separateness. It really feels weird. It really fucking
So-
feels weird that there's words coming out, but I don't see any eyes or any mouth. Like it's very highly specific stuff coming out really fast because it's their head types. Also, it's a
Mhm.
very weird combination.
And-
That's important to mention too, is that we're not saying 5s aren't talkative. There are extremely talkative 5s,
Mhm.
Yep.
right? But but it's it's talk coming from the other side of a wall or something.
Yes.
And I have a really, really hard time understanding anything they say.
Yeah.
just because they use so many words. I don't know.
Yeah.
They just use so many words. I'm just like, I can't keep up. I don't know what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's part of the separation too. Is it's it just comes across very separate. Like there's this wall, and I'm just gonna go, and I
Mhm.
don't care if you're like
With
they're
me.
not really tracking if you're with them. Like
Yeah.
and it's just sometimes people mistype a lot of these fives as like other head types. They might think they're a seven because how can be a five be this fast? We've had several examples in the group of people that came in that were like fast fives that were
Mhm.
really engaging, but that people thought they might be a seven. But what I think what people are missing is the sense of separation. If you are talking to a five, you're going to feel the sense of a wall, and like there might be a lot of words coming your way, but you're not looking at you. They're not bringing you with them.
Yeah, the fictional example of recently that is pretty good of a five is the Queen's Gambit. Uh, the character, I don't know, have y'all seen that?
Oh, I need to
Haven't.
watch that. I haven't.
I've heard things, but I haven't seen it.
It's good, and part of the thing is like that's she's like a chess master, and part of her deal is like she's brilliant, but like a theme throughout the whole show is her lack of actually making like real connections and relationships, and it's sort of like this efficient coldness in the face of it, like she's a competency type and stuff like this. And there's like one instance where she sort of like she has like a lot of like casual sex and stuff like this, and there's a character she connects with that she has like an actual like swept up sexual experience, and she's like, oh, that's what that's supposed to feel like, or something like this. It's like
Yeah.
but she's very this like hard alien quality, even if the character's not like all that weird, like, oh, she's so quirky. It's not like that. But there's this removal detachment. It's a fairly good uh fictional example of a five character when there's like a real deficit of them.
The girl
And-
with the dragon tattoo is another
That's
one.
another one. Yeah.
Five with
Yeah.
an 8 fix, probably.
Yeah, I do see her more as four. Like I see
Okay.
frustration running her more than rejection, but she could definitely be a five.
And also,
the-
there's been different iterations
Right.
too. So anyway,
The actress who plays that character is a real life five,
Yes, Rooney Mara. Yeah, she's
Okay.
a five.
though. But on this detachment front of things, this is something that I run into a lot of times that nines relate to, is a sense of feeling that they are detached, and so a lot of nines are not aware of the degree of how their attachment object relations is running them. And this is kind of a running theme with sixes and nines not really spotting their own attachment orientation. But I hear a lot of nines who relate to this five detachment, even though that's
Mhm.
like wanting to be avoidant of people. And one of the things that I had a recent coaching call with someone about is this sense of not liking people and feeling separate from other people, and just relating to that on a very generic level. And I try to make the impression that it's not the same thing as feeling like you can be a nine and be detached. And nine is a withdrawn type that is not wanting to be overwhelmed, but it's coming from a different place than what the five sense of rejection is coming from. And I don't think people realize the degree of separation, even separation from one's own body, the
Hmm.
extreme separation that is the five type structure. That is, I think, a nine would feel very uncomfortable with if they really, felt what that was like.
Also, that nines are noticing their detachment from people.
Yeah, good point.
It's kind
Yeah.
of the same thing as that social. Like people think, well, oh, I'm not really good at like communicating, so I must not be social. And it's like, no, you realize you're not good at communicating.
Yeah.
So you're probably social.
Exactly.
I'm social
That's a
blind
good
and
one.
I'm great at communicating.
Sure. Whatever you say, John.
Like
Everybody
I-
likes me,
I thought
Uh-huh.
I was a social. I thought at one point I was a social type. That's how fucking oblivious social that I was.
There you go.
I just didn't know how on earth, because I was like, I can make friends pretty easily. Like I feel like I'm decent. Put me in a foreign country and I can have, like a month or two, I can have like 20 people show up to a going away party or something like that. Believe it or not. I'm not bad with.
But they're the people trying to run you out of town.
Or fuck you. Either one.
Basically, yes.
There's no in between.
There's no in between. But yeah, I felt like I know people. I can handle people pretty well, and I just didn't understand how I could be social blind. And I think a lot of people who identify as 5 think, I don't like people, and so
Yeah.
the sense of detachment that I have is the same thing. It's like, no, it's not. It's the assumption of separation, the assumption that I'm the right way to do a relationship. That's one of the things that really stood out to me in the option relations call was, the assumption that the 5 has from birth is that the right way to do any relationship is for me not to be here. That's such a fucking wild thing.
Yeah. And again, 6s and 9s, who are typing as 5s, they're noticing their, disconnection or their desire to be away from people, right? And then they're
Mhm,
calling
yeah.
themselves 5s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just, if you're an attachment type, you're going to unconsciously be swimming into or bouncing off of other people in some way. And it's not to glorify this sort of separateness is the way to be, because it's just a different orientation altogether. And there's advantages and disadvantages
Right.
to both. Like, I think, like we've talked about with creativity, like you're crippling yourself in a lot of different ways if you're basically backing yourself into a specific corner.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily better to be that way. And a lot of 5s who are 5s would tell you that it's like oh, people idealize 8 or whatever. But if you're an 8, like you're like, okay, so what? It's like
Right.
I'm not the king of the word because I have this type. I'm just another person that has a certain type structure. That's it.
Right.
So often I see people attributing their pain and suffering to being a 5. It's like similar to 4, but it's like I'll see it's like when people feel like more they have like a wet suffering, they'll see themselves as 4.
Yeah.
Mhm.
People have like a drier suffering. I think they'll like 5 gets associated with being like a suffering type, like as if we're all not suffering. So I was curious if y'all had impressions of how to make a distinction between like 9-ish depression or 6 angst versus 5's avariciousness and overwhelm.
What's the 5 suffering? How is it usually depicted in what you're talking about? I mean, what style or how does it
Well,
look?
the way that I see it often is this sort of like intellectual existential torment. Like, and sometimes it does get a little bit accurate, like in the sense of being like an exposed nerve or like a
Mhm.
Kafka or Lovecraftian kind of like, ooh, like everything like everything's too just too much in a certain way, and kind of like a horrifying
Mhm.
not in these flourishes because I'm putting my 4 lens on it, but like in a horrifying universe or something like that. But I'll see this sort of attribution, or like I'm fascinated by death, and this kind of thing, like attributed to 5.
Yeah.
That's one aspect of 5 that's a little bit. I just have to go based on what some of the 5s have shared about their experience of that sense of overwhelm, because it doesn't sound like anything else anyone is saying, like the 9s and the 6s are saying. The distinction that I've noticed is that it feels like stimuli itself feels like an attack.
Yes.
To
Yes.
the 5, like just existing itself is too much. And it's not necessarily like I can hear a lot of 9s might relate to something like that, but it's coming from the mental center, where almost like the volume has been turned up so high that you have to get away from everything. And it's not like get away from the sense of like falling into a couch like a 9 might think of, but the fact of like the idea of like imploding in on oneself to get as far away from even yourself. Like your body is this thing that is overwhelming to exist in. Like all of stimuli itself is too much, you know, to take in mentally. And it's a different type of suffering, it seems like, than anything a 9 or a 6 might relate to.
It's like a mental for 5. It's like the word that gets used a lot is a swarm. It's like it's a mental swarming. Reality is like being swarmed by a bunch of flies, but it's in that mental space, right? Whereas
Yes.
like 9s, I don't know, in anxiety or whatever about existence, or it's much more flush through the body.
Yep.
I don't know how to verbalize that, but yeah, that's one of the main differences.
Yeah, I think that maybe it might be useful to point to like actual 5 famous people.
Yeah.
So that people can get, and then sometimes then who are some like Einstein, like who are some 9s that are normally thought of as 5.
It's a good idea. I mean,
So
that's a big one.
yeah,
People still think Einstein is a 5. So to wrap your head around the fact that Einstein is a 9 can, and why that would be the case. I think David's got an article somewhere on his website, probably, right? About
Yeah,
Einstein being a 9.
yeah. There's I just combed through, this is more than 10 years ago on the Riso Hudson board when we were having that debate, and combed through a bunch of biographies, and there's there are some quotes from Einstein that are so radically 9 and so radically not 5 that it's just like, oh my God. I mean, there's one quote that's like, I wish I had it pulled up right now. I'll do it when you guys start talking again. But it's something like, Einstein saying, I feel so much a part of every living thing in the entire universe that I have no idea where I end and everything else begins. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
the definition
God.
of type 9. I mean, it's like ding, 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 and there's, and he just had a reputation of, being approachable in so many ways that 5s aren't. Yeah.
Another one, that's pretty popular, and I find that a lot of creative people, I idealize David Lynch or are aware of him, and a lot of people think that he might be or is a 5, and it's a huge revelation for people to realize that he's a 9. And I use that example to illustrate difference between 5 and 9 because a big complaint of anyone who's watched a David Lynch film is that you get to the end and everything unravels and nothing means anything. Like you feel like you just woke up from a dream and you're trying to make sense of what just happened. And the more you try to make sense of it, the more make sense of what happened, the less anything makes sense. And so if anyone who's heard David Lynch in interviews, he talks about how, people have a hard time with his films, but it's like, it's trying to put you in sort of a dream state where sometimes you have a dream and you don't necessarily know the specifics, but you have a general vibe or feeling. And that's sort of like putting people into the experience of their own impressions of something that's nonverbal. It's totally not head. Versus other directors like a Stanley Kubrick, even if they're doing something that's not that gives you all the answers, it's coming from a much more different place. It's not trying to make you feel okay in the end. I think David Lynch inevitably tries to tell people, "Hey, it's okay. It was kind of like just a bad dream." Like,
Or he does stuff that's sort of like saying, "Ha ha, I was just kidding."
yeah, like I'm murdering somebody, but like someone's being killed on screen, but there's like this like kind of fun music in the background, and it's like you're not sure if it's not allowing the fucked upness to just be fucked up, and that's sort of a positive.
guys, David Lynch is dark. How can a 9 be dark?
Yeah, right.
How can anything but a 5 or a 4 be dark?
So yeah, there's some good directors that are good examples of fives, of like David Fincher and Kubrick.
Stanley
and,
Kubrick, Lars von
uh,
Trier.
Yeah,
Who else?
Hitchcock, was he a five?
Hitchcock is another one. Yeah, it seems like some of the greatest directors have been fives. Man, that's something.
Here's
Uh,
here's
Says
some of
something
the
about your bias.
here's some of these Einstein quotes just for a second, going back to Einstein being a nine. This is that quote I was looking for. I feel so much a part of every living thing that I am not in the least concerned with where the individual begins and ends. And then
disgusting.
yeah. And then here's another. I simply enjoy giving more than receiving in every respect. I do not take myself or the doings of the masses seriously, am not ashamed of my weaknesses and vices, and naturally take things as they come with equanimity and humor. Many people are like this, and I really cannot understand why I have been made into a kind of idol. So I mean, come on.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
not a five.
Yeah, not a five.
Like further examples of celebrity fives that might be counterintuitive. Like for example, Grimes is a social sexual five who's
Yeah.
pretty fast. Patti Smith is another one who's another five who's pretty fast and animated.
Marina
I think-
Abramovic.
Yep, another one.
Zizek. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tilda Swinton, isn't
Mhm.
she?
Another one, yeah.
Five.
Jodie Foster, is she five?
Jodie Foster is a six. Six wing
Yeah,
five.
6 of 5. Yeah. You know, she self-types as a 5, but she's wrong.
Oh, I didn't know that. Interesting.
yeah.
You're wrong, Jodie Foster.
I don't know if there's Bill Nye, the science guy. He's not a 5. He's a 6 wing 5.
I love Bill Nye.
Yeah,
See,
he's.
You can
not
say
a
that
five.
about someone, they're not a five.
I'm trying to think. There are not very many 6s that people think are 5s, are there?
I think the Institute don't they have Freud as a 6? I think he's a 5.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
a five.
That's weird.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just the thing about not a 5 is it doesn't get people as riled up as not a 4. Like
Right,
it's
because
not,
people aren't like, oh, you don't see me as much, like you don't like, yeah, like you're not seeing my pain as much with 5, because like people who identify with 5 don't generally feel the need for you to see them the same way that people identify
Mhm.
with 4.
like
They're
yeah,
not as loud.
people don't really get that upset about not a 5. Like not a 4 represents the entirety of this whole mistyping phenomenon because it's the one that gets people to pay the most attention. And so, you could do not a 5, you could do not an 8, but like generally the amount of outrage that people have about being told that they might not be a 4 is so extremely outrageous. And
Not a 4 is
And-
the funniest one.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hilarious.
not a 5 is pretty straightforward because it's like, oh, let me just show you what a real 5 is like. It's like, oh, I'm not that. Okay, the end.
Good to know.
Like last foothold that people have though, even when they're pointed these things, if they're not a 5 but they still are like insist to be a 5, is wanting to feel smart. And like
Mhm.
the antidote to that is just people being more aware of like how brilliant other types are
Yeah,
and
Yeah,
the
it's-
style of brilliancy that 5s have.
that's a
True.
huge one. Just like
Yeah.
showing enough examples, like, oh, this person that you admire that you thought was a 5 is actually 9. It's like,
Right.
oh, yeah, I really like David Lynch's films, and I identify, yeah, that's 9 stuff, not 5.
Right.
John Lennon's a good example of a famous 5,
Mhm.
and not intellectual in the way we think of 5.
Yeah.
Much
Mm.
more, and even I mean some of the stuff. Well,
The musician?
what's that?
John Lennon?
Yeah,
musician?
crazy. I know. How's it possible?
Not intellectuals.
Yeah.
Didn't see that one coming.
Amazing.
The other thing that just watching interviews of actual 5s is how much like interviews with John Lennon or or Tom York, or another one, Susan Sontag. She's an intellectual.
Mhm.
But just watching like how fucking, I don't want to say savage, but just how antagonistic they can be with interviewers in terms of just saying, I'm not answering this question that you're asking. Like, it's none of your business. That was one of the clips
Mhm.
that I think you, David, you've posted a couple times of Tom York just, in an interview being so annoyed by probing questions by an interview, trying to understand the inner workings of the band or some drama that had happened. And he's like, that's none of your business.
Yeah.
And
And
that's
and
it. That's
yeah.
it. I'm not even like, following that up with something else. It's like, that's none of your business. Next question.
Yeah. And the guy said it again, and he just goes, nope.
Nope. That's a really good distinction for Five, because they're not really flowing with. They're
They don't
not.
know how to
That's
flow.
that's the aspect of them not being with you, is that they only want to connect. And this is something that came up on the Five call. Is they're connecting very compartmentalized, like only this way at this time in this
Mhm.
topic.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we're not connecting at all.
Right. Even if they have a
Um,
lot of energy for connection, it's like very, very controlled. And then you're like, they're. I've known another Five who she was like really into the relationship and the idea of relationship, but then when it came to the practice of actually relating, you were like, I'm not talking to a person.
Mhm.
I guess Five's connecting.
Wanting to
It-
connect.
Yeah, wanting to connect versus actually connecting.
Right.
It's only on their terms, and which means it's not really connecting. It's just it's exclusive in a way.
Right.
It's excluding of other people, even though it's like an attempt to connect. It's not really.
I've known several Fives that like have an eagerness to connect and a lot of social energy and a lot of relationship seeming energy, but then when it comes down to it, there's almost no uh real avenue, no real pathway to actually connect with them. And because it's like so much mental energy, there's so much that they're sort of controlling the terms of relatedness and relationship to such a degree that you try to sort of venture off of their program and they either withdraw or they like kind of go to eight and belittle you in a certain way, like arrogantly putting you down. And uh, so it can be confusing because people can be, how can these friendly, seemingly outgoing Fives, sync with all the stuff that we're speaking to about this alienation? And I've known Fives that have a particular Five that she was very enthusiastic about relationship and did a lot of energy, had a lot of energy around relationship, talk about what it means to be in a relationship. But it was so conceptual that would create conflicts because people would inevitably act outside the weird narrow terms that this person had unconsciously defined and set on other people to behave or within the bounds of relationship as they understood it. It was all conceptual relationship rather than the felt sense of it.
And it's the thing, like from the psychic structures thing that we looked at,
Oh,
where
yeah.
where 2, 5, and 8 have this kind of main vein that's like a torrent, of energy, um which, in the context of being talkative, right, is in the case of 5, is not inclusive, right?
Yeah.
It's like this torrent coming at you, that is sort of almost too directionally focused, or
One directional, you mean like it's coming at you, but there's not a lot of coming
that's
back.
it.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no space for you sometimes.
And there's no way to enter at the sides either. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not, there's no curliness to it, right? Where you can hook things.
Right.
This
Right.
and this
Yeah.
gets at another thing that we didn't hit on, that's a little bit sensitive, but whatever. That I don't want to say that every Five is like this, but there's something about the Five type structure when it comes to relating to other people that's kind of autistic,
Right.
in the sense that there's an inability to even register these sort of normal cues, or to even allow other people to affect you, and this inability to really connect, this wall that we've been talking about. it makes it seem like the 5 is just sealed off.
Yep.
And it can feel like this person has an inability to connect,
Right.
to even register what connection would feel and look like.
Yeah, and it's not like willfully or rebelliously, trying to I don't know, establish independence or something, right? It just
Right.
it's incidental. It's incidentally just like blank in a certain space where people would normally connect.
Mhm.
Right.
Can't stress that enough, for people who might be identifying as 5, is that it's not like the effort of trying to separate from other people that you want to separate from other people, or that you feel that you're independent or you need to get away from other people. It's the sense that you have an inability to even be to even connect or even register what you could connect to, like this wall between you and others. And to see if you can sort of start to tap into that, to see how much of a problem that would be as a human being, of I might like not being able to really sense into other people and to read those cues, to just have that separateness, and how that might make you feel completely incapable of existing as a human being. Like, there's just normal things that people do that you're not capable of doing. And to sort of get into this, sort of strips away this idealization that we have of the 5 and the 4 space, to see how dysfunctional, compared to other type structures, those types are, that like, you're really cut off, disconnected from the body, but also detached from existence itself.
Cool. I think that hits it.
I mean, yeah, that's
Yeah.
enough.
That's we hit all cylinders.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
Anyway,
All right. Later, guys.
Okay.